The man screamed into the wall. Not because someone was hurting him. Not because anyone was there. He screamed because he had not heard a human voice in years. The sound bounced off concrete and came back to him, twisted and strange, like it did not belong to him anymore. He pressed his forehead against the cold wall of the cell and whispered a name he was afraid to forget. His own. That was life without hope. And this was one of America's longest solitary confinement cases. The cell was smaller than a parking space. Concrete walls. Concrete floor. A steel door with a narrow slot. No window to the outside world. The light stayed on all the time. Day. Night. Always the same. He had been there so long that time no longer made sense. His name was Robert Hayes. He entered prison in his 20s. Strong. Loud. Angry. He was sent to solitary confinement after a violent incident inside the prison. At first, officials said it would be temporary. 30 days. That was the plan. 30 days became 6 months. 6 months became years. And then the years just kept coming. The highest peak of this story did not happen with fists or weapons. It happened when Robert stopped speaking. One morning, a guard slid food through the slot and said, "Breakfast." Robert did not answer. The guard called again. Nothing. They checked the cell. Robert was sitting on the floor, staring at the wall, lips moving without sound. He had been talking to himself for hours. Or days. No one knew. That was the moment staff realized something had broken. And the question was simple but terrifying. Was it already too late? Solitary confinement is supposed to be quiet. That's the point. No noise. No people. No trouble. But the silence does not stay empty. It fills your head. In the beginning, Robert counted everything. Steps across the cell. Cracks in the wall. Seconds between meals. Counting helped him stay human. He did push-ups. He paced. He talked to himself out loud. Anything to feel real. After a year, counting stopped working. After 2 years, his memories began to blur. Faces faded. Voices sounded wrong in his head. He forgot what normal conversation felt like. Other men lived in similar cells. Men like James Carter. James had been in solitary for over a decade. Different prison. Same box. James once said the worst part was not being alone. It was knowing no one needed you. In solitary, days have no shape. You eat alone. You sleep alone. You think alone. If you get recreation, it is in a small cage outside. 1 hour. No talking. Just sky through metal bars. Robert began to hear things. At first, it was small. A tapping sound. A whisper that disappeared when he listened. He told himself it was nothing. But the sounds came back. Louder. That was a low moment. The mind turning on itself. Prison officials checked on him. They asked questions. Are you okay? Do you feel safe? Robert nodded. He had learned something important. If you say you are not okay, you can lose even more. Solitary confinement is meant to control dangerous behavior. But after years, it creates something else. Fear. Confusion. Hopelessness. And hope is the first thing to die. Robert began to forget words. Simple ones. He struggled to finish sentences when a guard spoke to him. That scared him more than the voices. Because voices can be ignored. Forgetting yourself cannot. Letters from family stopped coming. Not because they didn't care, but because they didn't know what to say. And Robert stopped writing back. He did not want them to remember him like this. One night, he pressed his ear to the door. He thought he heard laughter. It wasn't real. But for a moment, it felt real. And that moment hurt more than the silence. James Carter had a different reaction. He got angry. He screamed at the walls. He kicked the door. He cursed the guards. Anger kept him alive. For a while. Then one day, James stopped screaming too. That's when staff worry. Silence is louder than rage. The extreme moment of Chapter 1 came quietly. Robert tore his mattress apart. Not to escape. Not to attack anyone. He wanted to feel something. The guards found him sitting in the stuffing, Hands shaking, eyes empty. He did not look up when they entered. That's when the report was written. Severe mental decline observed. Those words meant something serious. Or they should have. Because Robert had now spent more than 15 years alone. No classes. No work. No human touch. Just walls. The prison system faced a choice. Move him out. Or leave him where he was. And the truth is, they waited. Because moving him meant admitting the damage. As the door closed that night, Robert whispered the same question he had been asking for years. How long? No one answered. And somewhere else in America, another man in another concrete box asked the same thing. The days after the mattress incident moved slowly. Too slowly. Robert was taken to medical for an evaluation. 2 officers stood nearby while a doctor asked questions. Simple ones. Do you know where you are? Do you know today's date? Robert answered, but his voice sounded far away, like it belonged to someone else. The doctor wrote notes. Then Robert was walked back to the same cell. Same walls. Same light. Same silence. Nothing changed. That was how solitary confinement worked. Even when something went wrong, the solution was often to return the person to the place where it started. In another prison, hundreds of miles away, James Carter was reaching a breaking point of his own. James had spent more than 20 years in solitary confinement. 20 years. No job. No programs. No normal conversations. Just routine. Open slot. Eat. Close slot. Every day. James had once been a leader on the inside. Strong-willed. Loud. Dangerous. That was why they put him there. At first, solitary felt like punishment. Later, it felt like the world had ended. James started keeping a routine in his head. Wake up. Exercise. Talk to the wall. Sleep. He repeated the same stories to himself so he would not forget them. Stories about his childhood. About fishing trips. About his mother's voice. Over time, even those stories began to fade. That was the low part. Losing memories you never thought you could lose. Robert and James never met. But their lives followed the same shape. Isolation. Silence. Waiting. Waiting for something that never came. In Robert's prison, a new guard started working the segregation unit. Her name was Angela Morris. She was younger. New to the job. Still believed rules were meant to help people. She noticed Robert. Not because he caused trouble. Because he didn't. He sat still for hours. Too still. One day, Angela spoke a little longer than usual. How are you holding up today? She asked. Robert looked at her. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. He tried again. I don't know. That sentence took all his strength. Angela reported it. She asked for mental health follow-up. The answer came back days later. Noted. That was it. Meanwhile, lawsuits were starting across the country. Families of men in long-term solitary confinement were speaking out. Lawyers argued that years of isolation caused permanent damage. Experts testified. They talked about anxiety, hallucinations, loss of identity. They explained what silence does to the human brain. Some prisons listened. Some didn't. James Carter became part of one of those cases. A judge reviewed his file. 20 years alone. The judge ordered a hearing. That was a high moment. The first real hope James had felt in years. When James was told, he laughed. Not because he was happy. Because he had forgotten how hope felt. Robert never got a hearing. His case sat untouched. Year 16 passed. Then 17. Time became meaningless. One night, Robert heard a voice clearly. Not a whisper. Not a sound. A real voice. It said his name. He stood up fast, heart racing. Hello, he said. Nothing answered. The voice was gone. That was the extreme moment. The point where imagination felt real. Robert banged on the door. He shouted for help. Guards came. They restrained him. He was moved to another cell in solitary. A clean cell. That was the solution. Across the country, James stood before a judge. He was older now. Thinner. Quiet. The judge asked him to speak. James tried. The words came out wrong. Slow. Broken. He explained what it felt like to be alone for decades. "I don't know how to be around people anymore," he said. The room was silent. The judge ordered James removed from solitary confinement. Not released. Just moved. That was everything. When James walked into a normal unit for the first time in 20 years, the noise hit him like a wave. Voices. Doors. Footsteps. He covered his ears. He cried. That was a different kind of extreme moment. Freedom hurting as much as isolation. Robert did not know about James. But somewhere deep inside, his mind still hoped. Because humans do that. Even when hope has nowhere to live. As chapter 2 ends, two truths stand side by side. One man was finally released from isolation. Another remained trapped. And the system had to decide something important. How long is too long? Before there is no one left to save. James Carter did not adjust quickly. The first night outside solitary, he could not sleep. Every sound felt too loud. Every voice felt too close. He sat on his bunk and shook, staring at the wall, waiting for the light to turn off. It never did. Because in the regular unit, the light wasn't always on. That confused him. For 20 years, light had meant safety. Darkness meant nothing. Now darkness felt dangerous. Freedom hurt. Other inmates tried to talk to him. James didn't know how to answer. His words came out wrong. Too slow. Too quiet. Some men laughed. Others left him alone. That was the low part of release. Being free, but still trapped inside your own head. Doctors later said this was common. After long solitary confinement, the brain forgets how to handle people. Noise feels like pain. Choices feel overwhelming. James had survived isolation. But survival was not the same as living. Robert Hayes was still in his cell. Year 18. The guards stopped writing reports. There was nothing new to say. Robert no longer shouted. No longer tore things apart. He Saturday. He waited. Sometimes he rocked back and forth. Sometimes he whispered words that did not make sense. That scared the staff more than violence ever had. Because violence could be punished. This could not. Angela Morris kept checking on him. She spoke even when he did not answer. She told him the day. She told him the weather. She told him someone was there. She didn't know if it helped. But she did it anyway. One morning, Robert collapsed. Not dramatically. He simply fell. The guards rushed in. Medical came. For the first time in years, Robert was taken out of solitary. Not for freedom. For survival. Doctors diagnosed severe mental damage. Years of isolation had changed how his brain worked. They wrote reports. Strong ones. Clear ones. This time, the reports could not be ignored. The prison moved Robert to a medical unit. A room with a window. A door that opened. People who spoke to him. He flinched when someone touched his arm. He cried when the light turned off. But he was no longer alone. That was the highest peak of this story. Not justice. Not healing. But connection. James slowly learned again. He learned how to stand in line. How to speak without fear. How to sit near others. Some days were good. Some were terrible. But time finally moved forward. Across the country, stories like theirs began to matter. Courts set limits on solitary confinement. Some states changed rules. Mental health reviews became required. Not everywhere. Not enough. But change had started. Robert never fully recovered. Some damage cannot be undone. But he learned his name again. He learned how to look at people. He learned how to feel sunlight. That mattered. James was released years later. Not free from prison. Free from isolation. He said something simple during a hearing. No one should disappear like that. Life without hope does not begin with a locked door. It begins when time stops. When voices disappear. When no one sees you. Solitary confinement was meant to control danger. But in its longest cases, it erased people. Quietly. Legally. Robert Hayes and James Carter were not alone. They were examples. Warnings. Proof that punishment without limits becomes something else. Something cruel. And that is the true story of life without hope. Inside America's longest solitary confinement cases. Where the body survives. But the mind is the real prison.